Hi folks, welcome to the channel, welcome to Spain. I'm Steve. Yes, in this video I'm going to talk about something I've wanted to talk about for a long time but never really been sure that I should, because it's quite personal, and if I'm completely honest, I've put it off a lot of times. And it's not really that I haven't really wanted to talk about it, but because it's one of those topics that can easily be misunderstood or taken out of context or turned into something it's not meant to be. So, right from the start, I want to be very clear about one thing. This is not a template for other people to copy. It's not advice, and it's certainly not me telling anyone else what they should do. But it is telling you what I did. Does that make sense? I think that makes sense. This is simply me explaining the thinking process I went through that made me realize I could actually afford to retire early and move away. Turned out to be Spain, which was something that I had always believed was totally out of reach for someone like me. And then a single realization that changed everything, which I'll come to later in the video. Now, for most of my life, I genuinely thought that retiring to the sun would be my dream. A really beautiful, nice thought, but not a realistic one. That's how I perceived it. I always imagined myself doing it, but then I couldn't really imagine myself actually doing it, if that makes sense. You know, it was something other people did. People with money, people with different lifestyles, people who'd been better with finances than I ever was. And if you'd asked me years ago whether I thought I'd end up living here, retired early, living on a relatively small budget, honestly, I would have laughed. But during COVID and lockdown, something changed in me. I had time, real time, to think properly about my life, my money, my habits, and what I actually wanted from the years I had left. And gradually, through a series of thoughts and realizations, I came to the understanding that I was in a much better position than I'd ever believed I was. And that shift didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't just about spreadsheets or clever finances or clever financial tricks or something like that. It was about how I was looking at money, time, and life itself. And you know, on this channel in the past, I've made quite a few videos about budget living, and I've also made some videos touching on affordability and other aspects of finances. But what I've never really talked about is the actual thought process that made everything click and made this happen. So if you're interested, stay tuned. And you know, the moment where my thinking flipped from I'll never be able to do this to I actually can't afford not to do this if I'm willing to live differently was the big light bulb moment for me. And that's what this video is about. Now, if you want the detailed backstory, the step-by-step stuff, I've linked previous videos below along with a link to my full video list so you can go back and have a look. But I'm not going to rehash all of that here. This video isn't about financial detail, it's about the realizations that allowed me to retire early on a relatively small budget. So let's start with the obvious thing that holds most of us back: debt and waste, and the whole combination of things that go with it. High monthly outgoings, wasteful spending, no real savings, and to be honest, a complete lack of financial control all my life. I worked hard, I earned good money, and I spent. And I was generally happy with that. But I also always knew that if those things existed in my life, especially to the extent that they were, retiring early and living abroad was never going to happen. And I accepted that for a very long time. I just thought, that's life. People get to do these things, other people don't get to do these things. But as I've explained in many of my earlier videos, I eventually found a way to get myself to a very different place. I got myself to zero debt, zero waste, and a far more sensible relationship with money. Something I never thought I could do. I didn't really think you could change as a person for most of my life. And I used to moan about debt as if, well, that's just the way it is, and it's terrible and whatever. But it was me. You're taking that. If you have debt, you're taking it out yourself. And one of the key realizations that I had way early on was that I owned a small apartment back home, And although I still had a mortgage on it, if I sold it for the right uh, price, the equity left was a fair chunk of money. Now, not massive, but enough to set me well on my way. I realised that if I sold that apartment, I would first of all have enough money to clear every debt that I had, everything. And not most of it, not nearly all of it, all of it. And not only that, I would have roughly 70% left over to put into my moving abroad, retiring early fund. Now, I fully realise that for most people that listen to this, uh, that would be a fairly dramatic thing to do. It was a big move, and it's not something everyone could do or would want to do, I'm sure. And it also required a level of bravery and willingness to let go of things that I've been connected to or connected to think that I needed all of my life. So, amazingly, when I look back on it now, I'm so pleased that it did, but that is what I did. And yeah, I know this might sound mad to some people, but it made perfect sense to me at the time. And I remember the day that I actually, after I sold my apartment, the day that I actually cleared all my debts. It all went at once: mortgage, car finance, loans, even silly things I was still paying off in finance, like my sofa and cancelling apps, etc., that I was just wasting my money on. And I do actually really remember thinking, am I mad? Is this crazy what I'm doing? And I knew my family would probably think it was crazy. I hadn't told anybody at this stage. But at the same time, it was the most freeing feeling I had ever had in my life. No mortgage, no car, no payments, no loans, nothing. My monthly direct debits went from almost 2,500 British pounds a month to just over, if I remember correctly, 200 a month. Yes, I had nowhere to live or anything, but isn't that amazing? So I'd realised over the lockdown period that being happy, satisfied was nothing to do with money or possessions. So when the time came, I found it relatively easy to let go. Didn't need a fancy car, didn't need a big house, didn't need a massive TV, and I didn't need every new gadget that come onto the market, which was a thing of mine. Now, I could easily sit here and list all of the things I stopped doing, buying, or caring about, and the logic behind them. But if I did that, this video would last forever. So again, if you want to understand that side of things, please go back and have a wee look at my previous videos. Um, but that realization was simple. And it was simple because I'd had a long time to think about it and work everything out. If you can get yourself completely debt free, 100%, you can live on very, very little if that's what you want to do. So that was realization number one. And there were other pieces to the puzzle. One was starting this YouTube channel. At the time, I had no idea whether it would ever make money. Only, I think it's 5% or something of people that ever start YouTube channels get to the point where they'll monetize you. But I wanted to see, could I turn it into a small income stream? Or if I'm lucky, maybe a bigger income stream. And eventually, I did turn it into a small income stream. And it really doesn't bring in a huge amount, but when your monthly goal is around €1,000, which is what mine is or was, even a small income becomes a meaningful percentage, you know. And I also then took the remaining money from the 70% from the sale of my apartment and put it into the highest interest safe savings account I could find. And again, there was interest on it, and it wasn't massive, but it was another percentage taken off my monthly needs. And I had never thought like this before. And and this is very important. Additionally, I had already planned in and decided that once I'd settled wherever I ended up, I would take on some part-time work to cover the shortfall. So when I stepped back and looked at the full picture, I realized something quite powerful. If I could stick to this new way of thinking, living on less, spending intentionally, and staying debt free, I could live a settled, comfortable life without constant pressure to earn more, which I had always felt. So I had the equity from the sale of the apartment, along with a fairly decent amount I managed to save during lockdown and those small income streams. And I also knew that I was likely to come into money at some point. Now, I'll explain whether I got this money or not in a minute. But first of all, explain what I'm talking about. At one time, I was sold a pension, and it turned out that it was a missold pension. And me, along with just over 1,000 other people, were fighting to recover it. And there was never a guarantee we'd see the money again. But eventually, we did. But it took 8 years. So I could never at any point work this money into my plans, as I was never sure I was ever going to recover it. But it was nice to know that the possibility was there. And I knew that if it did happen, it would put me in an even better position. Well, a couple of years into my new life, we won our case, and that allowed me to stop renting and buy a very small apartment outright here in Spain. And by the way, when I say small, I mean small, 59,000 small plus costs. And that's only a couple of years ago. And that purchase was life changing to me because it meant that the €1,000 a month I was living on dropped dramatically due to having no rent. And that in turn meant that more than likely I would never have to take a part time job on, which I now know I won't have to, as I had originally planned. So in the future, when I reach retirement age, it's still a few years in the future, but not that many. Um, I'll still have a decent amount of savings left. So I ended up with a second small apartment that I rent out. Which again, you'll have to go back and look at my previous videos if you want to know that whole story. But in such a good position, a better position than I've ever been in my life. Isn't it funny how things work out? Wasted money all my life, but as soon as I started to be more sensible, things just sort of clicked over a period of about 2 to 2.5 years. And what that meant to me, that meant that when I get to retirement age, I'll have my pension income, which I can live on reasonably comfortably here in Spain, just alone. But I've also got that along with the security of a couple of small properties. Now, going back to what I said earlier, this is where the big realization, the big thought come into my head. And this, of course, happened as well during lockdown, these thoughts. I realised that if I could cover myself until pension age, that even if everything went exactly to plan, I would still have savings. And as it turned out, as I've just said, I also have the property which could be sold. And this is where my second, and for some people, quite radical idea came into play. I'm single. I don't have anyone to leave inheritance to. And I realised something that hit me very hard. The last thing I would want to do in life is to die with savings sitting in an account and property of equity never used. So I asked myself a very blunt question. What age would I be, I can't believe I'm saying this, what age would I be happy to live to? And after a lot of thought, I settled in somewhere between 80 and 85. I then decided that by the time I reached 85, I wanted all my savings and equity to have been used to create a good, full, final chapter to my life. Didn't want to die and still have all my savings. Wanted to enjoy them. And it was a fantastic feeling when I realised that, because that put me in a far better financial situation for my sort of last 15, 20 years of my life, because I could spend it. And if I happened to live beyond that, I would still have my pension and at least one of my properties. Now, I know it's because I'm single and no dependents that I can do this. I understand that. I fully realise that this isn't how everyone can or should think about money. But that single thought, that reframing, made me realise I was in a far stronger financial position than I ever believed. And all of this gave me the confidence to go for it. Now, I hope this all makes sense. And I'm not trying to influence anyone to take chances. Don't take chances. I worked for, lockdown was, I don't know, 18 months. I worked in this the whole time. That's what I did during lockdown. I had a wonderful time during lockdown because all I was doing was dreaming about my new life once I realised that I could do it. Planning my new life. Marvellous. So this is like a short version of a very long story. But that's how I realised I could dramatically improve my life. By not working, by living in a better climate, by embracing a simpler, less cluttered way of living. But that all resolved around one thing: my ability to change my financial habits, my ways of thinking. Because if I hadn't done that, I would probably be in trouble by now. And that's something that anyone considering retiring on a budget needs to understand. Make sure your plan works, and you have to enforce it. It has to be for the rest of your life, not for a while. Um, Along the way, I lost my dad, who left me some money. But it is important to say this clearly. Even without those things happening, I was already carrying out a plan to live in this life. I didn't rely on the additional funds coming in. I had worked out how I could live happily on much less. Um, and if additional funds came in, then that would be a bonus. But I can tell you now, my life hasn't changed because I'm in a better situation. I haven't started to spend crazy. I'm going to wait till I'm 67 before I do that. I love traveling, as all my regulars will know. Well, I'm really going to start traveling at that point in time. So yeah, those things didn't make it possible. They made it more comfortable. And there you go. That's my story. It's a personal story that I get asked about all the time. How did you do it? And that's how I did it. So I hope you found it interesting. And this is probably the most personal I've ever been in this channel. And I always tell the truth and open up. But I don't think I've ever been just as open as this. But you know me, I always say things as they are, or at least as I see them. And maybe this will give some of you watching a fresh perspective. Because sometimes when we really look at our situation honestly, we're not always as stuck as we think we are, either in good or bad ways. But I'm going to leave it off there. All right, folks, hope you enjoyed it, found the video useful. That's it for this one. And of course, as usual, if you did enjoy the video, please subscribe, drop a comment below, give it a thumbs up. Thumbs up is so important. You can do it now, take a wee second. 1 second, just hit thumbs up. Doesn't cost you anything. But until next time, bye for now. Forgot to drink the Coke. Cheers, guys.